How are you doing?
Oh, good interaction. All right. You get to pick it because you're. Oh, good. We're covered in the key stuff. Yeah, we have. Not through the airport. Pardon?
Ben, how are you doing?
Something about like.
What's that?
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Some enthusiastic crowd in here to chat.
It's not working. You can help out.
You gave this charge enough. There you go. So thank you so much for coming and braving the weather and then doing all this stuff to get here. And this kicks off the 14th year of the QASIG.
Wow.
And it's so great to see so many familiar faces, and all the guys. It's been great to make friends with you over all the years. And so welcome back, and here we'll do it again. And we're lucky to have Curtis Sternberger, my former colleague, actually friend.
Actually, friend.
Breaking the fourth wall of engineering is the topic of tonight's talk, and so please welcome Curtis.
I apologize for the title of the topic. It was something I sort of came up with. This is based on my personal life experience, so that can be a little difficult to sort of encapsulate into like a very small little thing. So I came up with that idea, and since then I've thought it's really, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-important, something of that nature. So, but speaking of encapsulating things really well, it's something I always do in all of my talks. I suggest this, everybody does this. This is my Twitter handle. Please feel free to follow me. Please feel free to request me to do whatever. Most of us these days, when I say us, I mean people like myself. We just hand out business cards with that now. There's a lot of really much smarter and much more interesting people on Twitter than I am, and some of them are attached to me, so please do that. If you're not on Twitter, it is the place to be if you're a software tester right now. Enough with like pumping up that company that I don't work for. So, I'm also experimenting with a new format today. This is I'm doing sort of a lean talk. So if you see me walk back here and grab these things, and if you see me walk up here and start writing furiously, it's because I'm stealing one of your questions or ideas. So please be happy with that. Which was the only other rule I have for this. Number one, please join Twitter. Number two, if you have a question, do not wait for me to stop talking because I will just keep going. So I sometimes don't breathe. So if I pass out, you're a little small, maybe somebody larger could come up here and pick me up later if I pass out. Just raise your hand, just start talking, whatever you need to do, and we'll keep going. The way that I talk, I don't really have a slide deck, I don't really have whatever. I'm here for you guys. So if everybody's watching me online, I'm sorry, but you should have been here. If you have specific questions you want to have, if you came in here with expectations about what this talk is going to be like, please do not feel like I'm controlling it. Bring them up, talk about them, whatever you want to do. But the basic idea of this talk is a problem that I've been running into since around 2007 or so, maybe 2006. And that's when I began breaking out of this little bubble that we call software development. Prior to that, I got my first job in quote-unquote software as a software tester around 1998. I was working at Microsoft as a contractor. Had no idea what software testing was. It was just what they had available. And a friend that had more tattoos and piercings than is probably wise for anybody, no matter what age, got me a job there. Fell in love with it, but it was sort of a bubble. So my experience, my background that I came from was from liberal arts. Sociology, history, English. I'm used to having a wide variety of subjects to look at. Suddenly I'm in the middle of this little cocoon world that talks about engineering, math, and science. And that's about it. And science, of course, has like giant air quotes around it. And that we'll get it. If you want to talk about that, please go to CAST in New York. I have a whole talk about that. Hopefully they'll take. But most of what they do is involved with this little microcosmic world that we call computer software and computer software engines and hardware and things of that nature. And you need to be, because this is an incredibly imprecise and strange thing, and you have to sort of focus in on it. One of the things that does to you is you start to forget, and I just lost my code, okay? Anyway, you start to focus in on the things that I would like to call the known knowns and the unknown knowns. As in, I'm stealing from somebody who I'm not going to quote because this is Seattle and you may throw things at me. But he talked about, there's like 4 things that we can do. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, there are unknown knowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And at first that seemed really trite to me, but then as I began to think about it, it began to make sense. When you're working with software, most of the things that we are working with are going to be known knowns. That is, these are problems we know, problems we understand, problems we've solved in the past. We know what we're doing. We can step in and go, yes, I can do that. We also have unknown knowns. These are the things that kind of resemble the stuff that we know. These are the technical problems, these are the software, these are the languages we don't understand. Maybe they're the architectural structures we've never used before. But they're unknown, but they're kind of known at the same time. The other things we don't generally deal with, which are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. But right now we're just going to focus on the one piece for this talk, which is what I sort of started to term the known unknown. Sorry, I lost my card. When I first began running into that, as I said, it was back in 2007. And that's when I began leaving the world of software development and stepped into the world of banking. I got thrust into the Federal Home Loan Bank of Seattle, which is, if you knew what it was, you would be scared, but you shouldn't be. It's a sort of a layer underneath the banks that you know. Bank of America, Washington Mutual, oh, sorry, not Washington Mutual anymore. Bank of America, Chase, whatever. And their charter is to provide a cushion for them in case there is a massive failure. One of the reasons we didn't have a massive meltdown of our financial system like they did in Europe and in Asia was because of this system underneath it. So they are banks, but they are banks for banks. And they sit between the bank and the Federal Reserve. And they act as sort of, like I said, they act as a cushion and a buffer. I was tossed into that. So, picture in your head who I'm working with. These are bankers for other bankers. How geeky do you think they were about finance? They were massively geeky. So I had to start learning phrases and terms I'd never heard before, and I thought I was kind of smart. Some of them, I'm just going to bring up right now. How many of you know what a swaption is? A swaption. Much less a Bermuda swaption. Well, there are flavors. Another one is what they call a put swaption or a call swaption. Now, these are incredibly important because one of them is you are trading on a fixed interest rate, but the lender you're borrowing from is giving you a variable interest rate. And the other one is the opposite. Put call. And for them, they just knew this. It was a phrase they were throwing out. Kind of like when we walk into a place and say SQL, we know what that means, hopefully, right? No? Okay, anyway. I'd be surprised the interview said they're not. Anyway, so they kind of have to know that. They just know it. They throw it out there. But it's incredibly important to their business and it's base knowledge they have to have. And we were building software to help them do their job. So, how did we do that? As a tester, my job is to get inside the mind of our customers. My job is to be the voice of the customer, to act what I used to call the Lorax, and I would stand for the customers. In the middle of the room, I was the one saying the old phrase, somebody was joking about this, saying that one of the reasons why some of the early ideas to put Bluetooth into a car was a bad idea is because they used to sync your contacts as soon as you got in, and maybe not everybody in the world wanted every passenger to know who was in their contact list when they got into a car, because it would all be right there. My job as the tester was to be that guy who says that, yeah, maybe that's the case, and admit that maybe some people were hiding secrets from each other, but that was of value to them. I can understand that person. I can understand it when I was working with video games, because it's such a wide swath that I can start to understand them and kind of get to know them. When I was working at AT&T Wireless, I could kind of understand our customers there. These people were operating at a whole different level than me. So how we began dealing with that problem there, and I'm sort of, okay, also I'm going to go into how we did it wrong, and then I'm going to go into kind of how I think we're doing it right now where I am, as a blatant plug for my company. I have business cards. One of the things that we used to do, okay, let me just move these over. One of the things we used to do was our old friend, the detailed design specification. So very smart people would sit in a room with other very smart people, who, by the way, whose time was also very, very valuable. If you think a senior Ruby engineer, his time is valuable, talk to somebody who's a bond trader for other bond traders. They are up at 4 o'clock in the morning because they are now making $1,000 an hour by sitting there, at least. And Lord knows that's just the ones who would tell me what they made. So their time is incredibly valuable, and if they're not making money for the company, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So they had gotten in a room with very smart people and walked through the value statements and what they expected, wrote detailed design documents, and handed them down to us from on high, which then we would get. The other thing they would do, on the other side of it, was a lot of rounds of alpha and beta testing. We would buy into people who were usually the forward thinkers of technology and say, we're going to sit in a room, we're going to walk through this product we just built for you, and you tell me if it works or not. And we had to schedule this time out, and we couldn't just have an XP model that they're sitting with us, because again, $1,000 an hour. And we sort of walked, this starts to look familiar to anybody. Please raise your hand. Yeah? Kind of feels kind of waterfall-y, doesn't it? A little bit? So this is what we were doing. We were answering that question. And this is kind of, I began to realize this is where waterfall comes from. It doesn't come from people sitting around saying, hey, let's just show up and do our work that I'm told to do. It starts happening because people don't understand what they're doing, and they don't know how to get that information, so they begin doing this. They're saying, what do I know? What are my known knowns? What do I know? How can I fill in the gaps of what I don't know with what I know? So you start doing that. That's also when you fill in, and then that put up a gap that we had, which is between the technical people who were bond traders and the engineers who were building it. So they filled that gap with product managers. Oh, you're laughing, you should. These were people, in all fairness, they were very smart people, they were very motivated, but they were kind of the people who weren't successful in one or the other. So they were kind of trying to find a mid-path between the two. We had beer, you should have been here. And that's who was also driving the projects People who didn't quite understand the bond traders, people who didn't quite understand what we did. They were the ones in charge of us now. And because that was kind of inherently risky, because we were never quite sure in the middle whether we were getting it right or not, because they didn't quite understand fully, but they understood better than us, and didn't quite be able to communicate back to the people because they didn't quite understand what we were doing, they began to severely limit the changes we would make. So things like off-the-shelf software that seemed safe suddenly became a viable option. Because it's been vetted, it's been through, people know how to use it. And we began to customize it probably much further than you ever should, off-the-shelf software, because that was a risk for going back to the known known. We know this software, we know it works, we know it's vetted, so we'll just keep using it. Where it doesn't work, we'll change it. But small. Small little change. Small little change. Small little change. Eventually you get to the point where it's no longer the software anymore, but it is because you're paying a license for it. So that's how we were kind of didn't really work, and eventually what ended up happening with this company is a lot of the development work got pushed off because people realized that we're really not building software, we're just sort of doing support maintenance, and there's people out there who are much better and much cheaper and can do it 24/7. So that's what ended up happening there. Next up, okay, not next up, but I did a bunch of stuff. I went back into software because that burned me. I'm like, I'm never stepping outside of software again. This is safe. I love it. So I got into digital media. I got into, well, what else I did? Oh, digital media, where I met Tanya, by the way. And then I fell into this sort of round of getting back into the consulting and contracting world, which is where I met Cordev. But I just had a family. Well, my wife had them. I was just kind of there cleaning up. And I thought I wanted to get back into building something. And a friend that I used to work with at the multimedia company recruited me for a company called Accelerus in 2010. Accelerus is a company you probably never heard of, unless you happen to be in small molecule, non-organic chemical research. A show of hands? Anyone? Okay, well, it's kind of a joke, but they are, but they sell software to everyone from Eli Lilly to Pfizer to pretty much everybody involved in chemical research is probably using one of their products. So they're actually big in their niche market. The trouble is, what are we back to? Small molecule, inorganic chemistry. They are building products for incredibly smart people, for Nobel laureates who are working in chemistry labs. We're back to the known unknowns. I know I don't know that. I really don't know how a chemistry lab works. I really don't. Nor do I understand it. So, here's your little primer, what I gleaned in my year and a half at Accelerus. Oh, interesting. Most of what a chemistry experiment is this. Start with A. You add 0.001 microns, 0.002 microns, 0.003 microns, and you record the results of that mixture. Again, and again, and again, and again. This seems like a problem that computers can solve pretty quickly, doesn't it? Because this used to be in like notebook pads. People would write this down in a physical notebook and keep it somewhere. When you ever hear about a scientist's notes, that's what these are. So this, if you learn nothing else tonight, that's what this is. When somebody says a scientist's notes, it's a record of one small change that they did to a known procedure or a known process to see what happened. It's a very conservative market, but the trouble is, you have to know how this is going to be set up. You can't just use an Excel spreadsheet and say, I'm just going to pull this down and do whatever. You have to say, how is somebody going to set this experiment up? What seems likely? Microns, millirons. Cesium. How are they going to do this? Plus, we have modeling software for three-dimensional modeling of the actual molecules involved. But we won't even talk, because I wasn't working that project, thankfully. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about everything that set this up. So how did we do that? How did we get something that's useful for somebody with a PhD in chemistry to be working, using our product and say, I like that, it's valuable? We took a little bit different tactic at Accelerus. They had identified product owners. Now what these people were, they were actually multifaceted. These were people who were involved in the chemistry industry, both as former salespeople, lab assistants, but they also hired some very smart chemists to come into the company who maybe were academics or something of that nature and brought them in-house as their own personal brain trust. So we gave them the money to do their own research. We let them use our products. It was almost like a dog fooding process for us to be doing that. Trouble is, we were in San Ramon, California, which, if you've never been there, you're not missing much. It's in the middle of the Heartland Valley, just outside of San Francisco. Culturally, way outside of San Francisco. Yeah, you've been there. They actually erect giant Rush Limbaugh billboards just to drive us away, so we won't cross that barrier. The people who were doing this were all in their own company in San Diego because they're not software developers. So meeting with them took time, took energy. So what happened? We got the project managers in again. They would be the ones stepping in to say, we're gonna negotiate time with them, we're gonna help you communicate, we're gonna do whatever. And once again, they were the people who were kind of steeped in this. They had some training in chemistry, maybe a bachelor's degree, they'd done some work in a lab, but they also knew software. So they were kind of moving back and forth between the two worlds. But again, we had this problem of communication. And the other problem we had is, in a large company, we began to compartmentalize our product offerings. I think I'm losing my beer here.
Do you want to have
No, I think there's a hole in it. I probably should just put it over here.
When you set it down,
We set it down.
Oh, it did?
over.
Okay.
You're good.
I am so glad this is all on video. It's going to be great. Daddy, why do you smell like beer? Well, this is why. So, where was, okay. So, as the products began to form, and because of these barriers, the products became very compartmentalized. As I said before, an intrinsic part of what we were building was the ability to model ahead of time what we thought the experiment was going to look like. Yet it was a completely different team in a completely different area working on it. Because they had the people who knew about that system and what it would look like. And so they had the ability to work on it. We had a different system, so we kind of broke it apart. So that's also kind of cool. It's like, going back to the known knowns. What are we really, really good at as engineers? We take complex problems, we break them into component pieces, and we solve those little pieces, and then put them back together in a hope to God to solve the big problem. That's what we were doing to solve this. We said, we also don't know the whole flow from start to finish for doing this research, so we're going to break it apart into pieces we can wrap our heads around and do that. So, how did that work out? Obviously I'm not there anymore, but similar thing happened. Because they were compartmentalized, because the knowledge was being kept outside of everything, because the people who were doing the quote-unquote real work didn't feel like they were part of the team that was building the software became devalued. We were providing tools for somebody else to do the real work. So we became support. We became people who were responding to Eli Lilly. And honestly, when Eli Lilly calls you up and says, please give us that, you do. They have very, very deep pockets. And they can write some checks with a whole lot of zeros behind it. So you do that. And then you offer them support, and they accept it. And then you have a guaranteed income stream for a long time, which is a known known. You now have a customer that's interacting with you, giving you money to do that, and you make money but it sort of turns us into support for them. So somebody, again, some bright person realized that's what we were doing, and there are places around the world and teams that can do that that are built for that and not for developing software. Away it went. I've got some really good friends who are currently searching for work because of that. So that was in 2010. So far we've tried the old waterfall method, where we go through and develop out the detailed product specifications that were written by somebody else that were then translated into something that the engineers could use. We've tried the sort of distributed model. We break things into component value pieces and try to build that out and see how it's going to work. That brought me into a company called Medrio in around 2012. This company is still active, so there's no horror story here. They're still going strong, as far as I know. They're a startup that is seeking to completely revolutionize how phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trial studies are done, both here and I believe in Europe and Asia at this point. So it's again a niche market, but it's one that every single one of you, if not yourself, owes their life to. You know somebody who owes their life to it. So the reason why drugs and devices, whatever, are so expensive is because it costs so much dang money to go through these processes, to go through these studies. And the company that's trying to get things on the market is the one that pays for it. So whenever you hear somebody say, oh, they paid for that study, everyone pays for it. If the government had to pay for that study, we'd be marching on Washington right now with pitchforks. Because that would be billions of dollars going into test products that we may never get to afford to use. So they're coming in, and their big thing was, we are going to take this process, which normally is run by enterprise software, is very expensive, very bulky, it can take a long time to switch and change what you're doing. When you've designed these studies for how we're going to do it, we're going to take that and take it online into the web. It's going to be dynamic, it's going to be innovative, it's going to be agile. One of the problems with the enterprise method for doing clinical trial studies is once you've built that thing in and locked it in, you're kind of locked. If you begin getting feedback, you begin getting data that doesn't match up with your expectations, switching that around is incredibly expensive. You've got to replan your study, you've got to resubmit it for approval, you've got to print out thousands of documents and ship them out to someplace, retrain your staff about how to redo these new processes and new protocols. It's huge to do that, which is again why it's so expensive. They thought, what if we didn't actually print out documents? What if we tried to make this incredibly simple and intuitive so we didn't need to train you how to fill out the form? You would already know. What if we made this so you could do it on an iPad? You didn't have to have a ream of documents walking around as you did it. Seems pretty obvious, right? Well, the trouble is, we are back again to a bunch of software engineers stepping into a field we don't know. How many of you, you're very smart people, how many of you have ever even participated in a clinical trial study? One. Okay.
Fred Hutch, Seattle Cancer.
Oh, okay.
Seattle Children's.
Okay. Were you using like filling out forms, or were you doing a diary, or how were you doing that?
Binders.
Binders.
So this is FDA. So
oh.
You see where I'm going? That's why I was questioning where you're going, because saying that's a great idea, but then regulatory steps in, and until you change those processes, at some point, that you know what I'm saying? It has to be.
I love you, by the way.
So
That was
very curious where I was
because
going.
that was one of the things that bit us.
Yeah. You can only
We
go so
had more protocols around document history and record retention than you will ever find in, well, as a certain election in Florida in 2000 proved, even physical documents are not really secure. We had date time stamps, we had locks on everything, we had watermarks up the wazoo, but the people who were doing the auditing, who are actually not part of the FDA usually, they're usually independent auditors that are hired, who are then interpreting the FDA regulations and what should be done. We missed them. We thought of the FDA, we knew the FDA, and I had to immerse myself in the FDA regulations, which is about as exciting as it sounds. And because I'm the quality assurance manager, by the way. Well, by the way, all these things I mean, throwing this thing, you're now in charge of quality. Go, Mr. English major. So yeah, we had to familiarize ourselves with that, but we missed the auditors, so we had to backpedal really quickly and come up with processes to sort of fill them in. One of the ways that we didn't hit other problems, though, was because the CEO and the founder came from that industry as a salesman, so we kind of understood it. But the trouble is, it was tribal knowledge that was in his head. As we got bigger, it was fine. Those of you who've been in a startup, how many of you have been in a startup before? How many of you have been in an early stage startup? Okay, how many people were there?
I've been at more than one startup.
So,
one of them 20 people. Actually, two of them 20 people to start with. One went to over 200 people within 2 years.
oh yeah, they can balloon, can't they?
Yeah.
How many?
5.
5. Okay, anybody less than 5? No, because we're testers. We don't get invited to those. We're like the keyboard players in a rock band. We're brought in to fill out the sound. So feel free to use that one. I wanted to catch on. But yeah, so when you are the 5 or the 20 people company, having that person who has all that tribal knowledge in their head works. Because they're right there. You can go ask them questions. Say, okay, well, I don't quite understand why somebody like building out this trial study would do that. And they can tell you. They may not be the best authority, but that knowledge is right there and you can grab it. And if they don't know, they can get on the phone and call somebody who can. Because the reason why they got this company started is because they are known in the industry, they have money behind them. And even in the Wild West 19-year-old gets VC capital funding thing myth of the Silicon Valley, you do kind of have to know what you're doing to get a check from somebody. These aren't stupid people. So they knew him, they knew his background, he could get on the phone and call somebody. What happens when you're a 200-person company?
Well, one of the interesting things that happened was the 20 to 200 people,
Mhm.
we spent that entire time reinventing our processes.
Yeah.
Because what works for 20 people doesn't work for 40 people, doesn't work for 80 people.
How accessible was that
doesn't work for
CEO?
150 people. At 200, not nearly as much as at 20, right?
Yeah. And you begin hiring for specific jobs.
Oh, yeah,
One of the things when you're 20 people, you hire for the person.
right.
And it's a myth, but it really is. I mean, because you're 20 people, you're in a room together. You don't want to have an idiot or somebody who smells of falafel all day, which used to be me. I cleaned that up a little bit. You really don't want to. You really hire for the person. When you become 200 people, you start hiring for the job, and that's when you start running into this again. Because you're hiring for somebody. I just need a system administrator. I've done this myself. I've caught myself doing this, walking into my boss's office and saying, I just need somebody who can write Java. I don't care if they can test. I really don't. I'm just tired of writing it myself at 3 in the morning when I have no sleep. Just give me somebody.
It's amazing also the flip side of it is when you hire for a job, sometimes what you get is kind of apathy in the person where they're not going to do anything about their job.
Well, you can kind of screen for that, but you're right. You can kind of screen for that a little bit, but you start moving away from this idea that we all understand what we're doing. We all have access. The CEO knows us. We can go talk to them. Now there's barriers. Now there's levels between that information and what you're doing. So if you don't have that information, you lose it. It's in-house, but there are now circles around it of meetings and phone calls and things. And that's one of the things that can breed apathy. People come in, join this startup, it's really exciting and sexy. And then it's a job. So, yeah, yes?
So when you find yourself in a place with a very specific subject matter, which we're talking about today, and you get that guy who's like, I do Drupal, that's my thing.
Yeah.
Set me in front of a computer, I'll do Drupal all day. Do you think you're more likely to run into the problem with a guy that's not going to know or care or be interested in the subject matter?
Okay, we're diverging a little bit.
Sorry.
Can I see a show of hands for who wants to go this way?
Just no further, but just to answer that.
Okay, how about no further, just answer this one question.
Yeah.
Okay. The way to answer that is how much Drupal do you need?
How much what?
How much Drupal do you need?
Oh,
I guess
Can you afford to have somebody who's specialized like that? And if you can't, you've answered your own question. So, I mean, there are places where I've been where we did need the guy who all they did was Ruby. Because there were 2 of them, and we had a lot of Ruby. So even if they wanted to do more, we probably wouldn't have let them. So it was it was a great fit to have somebody that just came in and put their headphones on and did their thing. Because there was a lot of work to do, and we knew what it was. Other teams wouldn't have worked that well, because they were sort of trying to figure out what they needed. And you either fall into the one thing where it's somebody else's problem, or you fall into the fallacy of, if you have a hammer, everything is fixed by a nail. So you just have to analyze your situation and say, is this appropriate or not? And if it's not, that's the hard decision to make. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's what happened with Medria. Like I said, they're still going, but they have other problems with their issue where they have the typical hero culture, they got whatever, and so the CEO is refusing to remove the tentacles. So they're one of these companies that Clayton Christensen talked about. We talked about, not Christensen, good to great. Putting you on the spot. Anyway, Colin, thank you. Colin, good to great. Talked about that. They will just sit and probably for the next 10 years do very well and incrementally improve and have a certain amount of the market. And it's a good company to work for. You're probably not going to be worried about getting fired the next 6 months. But they're not breaking out because they've reached their limit of what they know and what they can know and mostly what they can communicate to each other about that knowledge. So, let that come. Mutual choice, we'll call it. I then went to work for some other companies and landed at Electronic Arts, was the chief tester person for their data group, and then got a phone call from somebody that I kind of barely knew about this company called the Climate Corporation. I'd never heard of them before. Even though I was working in big data, I'd only been there for a couple of years, so I was like, all right, well, let's check this out. And looked at it. It's probably, remember I talked about the bond traders for the bond traders? I met a group geekier than them. That's these people. These are people who, we actually have job descriptions. Let me see some of them. I wrote some down here, but we actually have things called a quantitative agronomist. That is an open job description we currently have. So if you know any, please tell me. We are looking. We have remote sensing scientists that we need to hire. We have statistical anomaly mathematicians. We have chaos theoreticians in there. I think we're all chaos theoreticians. We're all. No, please. We're in there, but then we've also got actuarials, insurance people, we've got finance people. It's like a giant melting pot of geekdom. And by geekdom, I mean people who are so focused on things they love that they just have to tell you about it. And they don't understand, you don't know about it. They'll just keep going. And they actually get hurt if you don't understand them, so you just let them go. And it's like drinking, every day, when I first joined Microsoft back in 1998, if I can look back, my friend warned me with the giant piercings and tattoos, that I feel like I was drinking from a fire hose. And I thought I knew what he meant. And it seemed like that way in Microsoft. It's like that every day at Climate. Every day I walk into a meeting and I hear about soil impaction or Bayesian modeling of weather patterns. Or so I'll walk in and there'll be what looks like something from Good Will Hunting just doodled on a desk because somebody was bored. So how do we approach getting the knowledge? Okay, how many people have you actually heard about me and know what climate.com does? Maybe you do, I know. But okay, well, I'll just give you a quick rundown really fast. We are in the world, this is my standard spiel, we are in the sexy, sexy world of crop insurance. What we do, the old model of crop insurance was heavily government subsidized. It was based upon yields and reported yields. So there was a lot of room for fraud. There was a lot of people had to do a lot of stuff. It was very imprecise. which is why only governments can support it. There's a lot of areas of the world that don't have crop insurance because of that. We, on the other hand, are using what is probably actually really big data. We are pulling in data from 12 sources, I think, at about this time, on a micro level. So within, like, say, 100 yards square, we're getting data for the weather in that specific spot, all over the country. And soon to be, I can tell you this now because we made the announcement, soon to be Latin America and then probably into Asia. We're getting it from multiple sources. We're getting it from weather stations. We're getting it from observation posts. We're getting it from possibly temperature stations within the ocean.
Right.
We're getting it from Doppler radar. And we have historical data thanks to our combination with Monsanto going back 100 years. It used to be 30, now we're going back 100. Because that's one of the reasons why we were happy about joining them. It's because they gave us access to all this lovely, lovely data that they've been keeping around for as long as they've been around. So we take all that historical data, and then we start running 1,000 to 10,000 statistical models for what the weather is going to look like at that one specific spot for this coming year. And then, this is where the agronomists come in. We go through and say, what are you planting? What's the soil in that spot going to be like? And then how's that going to affect your crop? If you're planting corn, we think the maximum yield you're going to get is 35 bushels an acre for that field. And then we'll insure you against that. If there's a drought, if there's hail, if there's early frost, if there's late frost, depending on whatever the crop is, whatever the area is, we start taking money down off of that. If you get below your deductible, we cut you a check. We don't care what your yield was. We honestly don't. You could have gotten 15 bushels out of that, or 105. We don't care. All we know is what the weather says it did, and then we'll cut you a check. And we've been in business for about 7 years now, so I think we're getting it right. But that's who we're dealing with. That's our end product. So we have an end product. We have a bunch of parties involved in this that are not software developers. We have farmers who are using our product to help them use less irrigation, use less pesticides, use less fertilizers to get better yields out of the same acreage for very little money. So we have insurance agents who are selling it to us. And one of the problems we're running into here that we didn't expect, but we're finding out now, is that a lot of these agents are also seed sellers. And they also sell, their biggest crop though, is something called nitrogen. That is their huge thing. One of our goals, and if we do not do this, we are not a success, is reducing that significantly, as much to zero as we possibly can get. So, if your money is built on selling that, we have to give you another source of income. So we have to understand you for that rate, an insurance salesman that's doing that. We have agronomists. We have mathematicians, and by mathematicians I mean real ones. Not statisticians who run algorithms in a computer. Well, they are, but anyway. And we have on and on and on. So, how are we doing this? And the way I think after learning all of this, how are we doing testing for that? That's right. We're sort of taking an approach to this. One of the things that we started doing, which I think is the wrong road we're going down, and like if people around my company are watching this now, you already know, so this isn't weird. We began trying to do acceptance test-driven development. So we began writing out our user stories as if they were runnable tests we could do, which I think is great, but doesn't cover the gap. Because you have to take knowledge that's in someone's head they've gleaned over 18 years and put it into a runnable test, which you're not going to do. You have to be able to find a way to look at let's go back to a Bayesian spread. If I run my data through a Bayesian spread, I get a nice graph. Will my acceptance test tell me if that graph is acceptable? Not right, because it's never right. Is it acceptable? Does it look right? You can't do that from a test, from an acceptance test. So we're moving away from that. The innovation we're sort of bringing in is we're decoupling validation and testing. We're moving away, we're acknowledging the known unknowns. We're acknowledging we don't understand that. And we're probably not going to find somebody who has not only a degree in quantitative agronomy to help us test it, we're probably not going to find somebody who has experience doing it. So we had to approach this from a context standpoint. What information do they need? What are they really getting from us when they do this? They're getting data. So what are we supposed to be doing with that? We test the data. That's what we did. We're breaking that one job of the science tester into two. We're approaching it by saying, we're going to have somebody who's very, very good at doing data validation and analysis. By taking a look at sampling spreads and saying, are we getting gaps? Are we getting whatever? Is something reversed? But this is big data again, so this isn't just I'm sitting at my SQL thing running it. They have to be able to find a way to do statistical sampling of the data as it comes in petabytes. And say, is this looking right? Or is my sampling right? Let me re-experiment again. So that now we're getting to real science. But it's a different type of science. We're hiring interns from universities and colleges and giving them a chance to join us by saying, you'll help us run these. We can validate the data looks right. You tell us if the models are running incorrect. But joining us as software testers, though. And that then gives us, moving back to Medrio, access. That provides cross-pollination between the people who actually understand what we're doing from the science with the people who understand the technology. So I'm hoping that's, and this is also an experiment, but hoping it's the right way. By bringing these two people together, I'm hoping on the same team, I'm hoping we can do that cross-pollination and get them working together like that. So far it's working. But I'll hopefully come back in like a year or two and tell you if it worked. Or if I'm now at another company. So, anyway, so that's what we're doing in a nutshell. And I apologize if I rambled on. Questions? Anybody?
So, in climate, you guys are the insurance broker? You guys are
Yes.
offering the policy?
Yes, the agents that we employ are our employees.
How have the premiums that you guys are offering diverged from your competitors, or have you found that?
The most surprising thing that's happening is we don't really have any competitors. We are the only ones offering private crop insurance in the world. So it's not a good place to be.
Is there any?
Honestly, it's really not, because if you're the only one doing it, you don't have anybody you can measure yourself against and say, what are the other ideas and are they doing it better than us? You're kind of whacking away through the bushes hoping you're actually getting to the temple. So, yeah. But to answer your question, one of the things that's kind of been interesting to us is that we're becoming, a lot of the farmers are using us, going back to what the farmers need. And we're also, to answer this question, I should have put a note on this. We try to hire people who, for me, people who come from a background that understands farmers. So you're in San Francisco or Seattle or St. Louis or Chicago now, but where'd you grow up? Did you grow up on the flatlands? Did you grow up, and you'll know, if you were from there, you'll know what that means.
Yeah.
Or did you grow up, on a corn farm in Indiana, or near one even? Do you know any farmers, or are your grandparents farmers, whatever? That gives you an insight that some people don't have. And it may be not the decision that says, okay, I'm going to hire you, but it's going to factor into my decision. And I'm going to think, huh. So, yes.
I've got a question for you. How is this sustainable at the way you're portraying it going outside of the United States? For example, farmers, that makes sense, but now you're going aggregate farmers, multiples of Latin American farmers, Asian farmers, African farmers. Okay, it's not the same mold. Same thing for
In what
agents. Well, they don't have the same environmental, weather, crops, soil, cultural expectations that the government's putting on how they tax stuff, so therefore
size of farms.
you kind of get into the variance between all of those. So as you're bringing together this core group of success, now you're going out multiples of different kinds of farmers or multiples of different kinds of arguments that need to understand that area. Or, you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it seems like it's not one size fits all as you start expanding out into those. So I'm kind of curious how that works.
It kind of is, okay, also, quick show of hands, who's going to keep going, or should we, because I could also do this in a, okay, all right. It kind of is, but it kind of isn't.
Okay.
Because one of the things that's happening now with industrial farming and with the world global trade is that there's not as much diversity as you would think anymore. Part of that is because of large companies like Monsanto, but part of it's also because of large companies like Monsanto. And I'll explain that because their business is to, I mean, I'll just like throw it out there for everybody who says, yes, GMOs, yeah, whatever. But their main thing they do, I've actually met their genetic scientists and talked to them, and part of us helping share their data, about what they're doing, about what data we have and what data they have would be useful. It's much cheaper for them to do a hybrid of a known strain. So one of the things they do is they fund people to go out and look for new sources, new breeds, new whatever of plants they can use. One of the things that they were talking about, one of the pest-resistant strains that people claim is a GMO is actually a crossbreed with another form of corn that has the ability to absorb this thing from a mold.
Okay.
So, and that mold prevents, and when you do that, over a couple of generations, you develop this corn that this specific pest will not attack. It's like the flavor or whatever. The specific one is called the corn rootworm, and it will probably adapt another tier or two and figure out how to let that actually is yummy. Because it's a really insidious little freaking plant pest. But yeah, just how insidious this thing is. Farmers figured out that it had a 2-year cycle. That it would lay its eggs, wait, and the next year it would plant it. So they began planting soy and whatever. The bugs figured that out and began changing their mating cycle to match how they rotate the crops, even in the same field. Yeah, that's what farmers are up against. Nature. Nature in its great, wonderful way of doing things.
So
So,
economies of scale has all kind of already been in front of you now, and you're just being fast followers on the
yeah,
GMO
the
side.
only, yeah, so they've already done the work for us about going out and doing this. So we have to develop models, but we do have phenology models we have to build for how things are going to do. But the big thing is the weather. Because one of the things that we have that's really nice in Europe and the United States is we have a lot of weather stations. We have Doppler radar almost everywhere. We have listening posts. I bet you we could walk out right now and we could probably find 1 or 2 weather stations. Not just because UW is there, but there's in most major urban centers there are a bunch of them. Not so much in Argentina. So we have to, that's one of the issues, I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we have to test for when we're doing this, why we have to hire people who can separate those two out, the data validation, because if you get gaps in, what's an acceptable gap? If I don't have weather data for July 17th, 2012, can I just extrapolate that July 16th and July 18th, we'll just put them together and say, well, just assume it's the same. But what happens if it's a 2-day gap, 3-day gap, 4-day gap? Can we still keep stitching it together in a Jurassic Park kind of way with frog DNA? Or, I mean, where is that boundary? And I need people who can think like that. You can say, what happens to the models if we have gaps? What happens to the models if we have unexpected things happen? Because it's going to happen. And it is built into the system when we move into places like the Ukraine or Argentina or Brazil or Mongolia. So, I'm just saying, bring it in Mongolia. But
in third world countries, are they going to have the accessibility to the technology to look up the data and the applications that you're going to be selling them for the insurance?
yes. One of the interesting things about a lot of these countries is that we call them third world, but they're actually, I call them hopscotch. Because a lot of them have jumped over. So they may not have landlines, they may not have television antennas, but there are smartphones, there are tablets, there are 3G. Some of the places actually have better 4G than we do. Because of our monopolies, and anyway, no, that's not the subject. They actually have better wireless service than we do. There are other areas like power is kind of dicey, electricity, in some of those areas and things, but they're no more resourceful than we are. So they come up with ways to get around that. It's just, yeah, it's always amazing to me to go to some of these places and see the discrepancies, like, oh, they don't have this, but yet there's a 4-year-old with the iPhone. Okay. So I don't think that the technology barrier is going to be a problem. So I think the lack of infrastructure, and I think the cultural one is a big one too.
Have you branched out already to those?
I
Still?
read the press releases.
Okay.
Yeah, you and them. Yeah.
All right, so you said you were hacking through the jungle, hopefully getting to the temple.
Yeah.
El Dorado, where you found the pot of gold.
We'll hope it's El Dorado. Yeah.
It may be the.
It could be
what
the
you're
wild
going
log
to
ride. Yeah.
Is you're hacking through the jungle and you're going to go to a cliff. In other words, there are probably some major pitfalls, especially when you're doing statistical related items and dealing with insuring, where you have taken on a real liability. What steps are you guys taking, and what sort of processes are you putting in place to help detect those high risks or those pitfalls? Given the fact that you're in the middle of the jungle, you don't really have clear eyes on all the areas.
Yeah, that's an incredibly good question. Thank you. And I'm not just saying that so I can have time to think. Well, yes, you're right. I mean, and certainly we are trailblazing, but like anything truly innovative, we are not really doing something innovative. These questions about insurance have been answered. These questions about weather prediction have been answered. These questions about statistical analysis have been answered. These questions about actuarial tables have been answered. We're just applying them in a new way in a different industry. So yeah, so we are mitigating our risk to a large extent by not grabbing onto the bright, shiniest, newest thing out there. We're using established things. We are applying them in a new way. So it's kind of scary that way. And it's scary for our customers, who are incredibly risk averse, because as a friend of mine once told me, a farmer gets 40 seasons if they're lucky to get it right. That's it. Imagine if you had 40 product launches and you were dead. That's all you get. That's what a farmer has. So they get very, very risk averse. And on top of that, if you don't get the first 5 right, you're done.
Or they're looking for a way to legally pull finances out of a company that they might be able to.
There's some of that.
There's some legal risk there.
There's some of that. There's some things you have to prevent against fraud and things, but for the most part, people are not going to defraud you. And I mean, our system is kind of built around the idea that it's very, very difficult to defraud us, because how do you fake hail? I mean, I can, but I know the system. But how does a farmer using an iPhone fake that it hailed over 3 of their crops, now they get a check? The old system was actually a lot more prone to fraud, because they could just claim that they'd only harvested X number of bushels and then go to another granary cell that was run by a friend of theirs.
They go to the weather station that's planted out between the 3 farmers' lots.
Yeah, but then it goes to a risk reward. It goes to a risk reward thing at that point. If you're going out there and doing that, then you're like, well, how much am I really getting out of this? So the big thing for us is we have to be able to prove that we can do what we do, that it's worth their money, that they have these established methods for applying nitrogen, for doing crop rotation, for using certain tools to plant it. And they know it'll work because they've done it before, and now we're coming in with something new. So that's our biggest risk, is helping them see that happen and then being right. Because if we're not right, we go out of business.
Or if they don't believe you or don't trust you, then they don't buy it.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Luckily, Monsanto's helped us like abate that a little bit.
So what's your success rate versus the Farmer's Almanac?
That's one of the 12 ones.
What's amazing about it is how often the Farmer's Almanac nails it, and it's like, wow, it's so unscientific.
That's actually an apples to koalas question, because the Farmer's Almanac is not that local. A farmer can't go out to the feed store and buy a Farmer's Almanac for their field.
So
whereas they can with us.
It was exactly
So,
in one area where
it was right in a journal sense, and the Farmer's Almanac also says we think it's going to be like this in this area for this time, which is a question we've been able to answer for quite a while.
So they're vague enough that.
Yeah, and also the other thing that's happening, which is actually causing the Farmer's Almanac to deviate, is a little something that certain news channels like to deny is happening, which is weather craziness. So, I'm not going to use the term. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to walk into it, no. But we've got weather craziness happening, and that's one of the reasons why we became a company. The first incarnation of this company is called WeatherBuild, and it was we had a deal with Expedia to provide I actually joked that the CEO watched, I think it was Superman 2 or 3, and got the idea for this joke, for this company. But you can take out insurance. You can take out insurance against your vacation that the weather would be good.
Oh, wow.
And if you went to Aruba or something and the weather was crappy or there was a hurricane, you would get money for the insurance for that. Didn't really work so well. It was not really a money maker, but then farmers, when then people began to look, they began to look around and say, what else can we do with this? And found crop insurance.
Awesome.
Yes, and we'll come back to you, sorry, yeah.
Cool, so you had described having a dozen sources for, say, 100 square foot plot of land, and you talked about running simulated
Some of them are for the
models.
specific plot of land, but yeah.
Sure, so you did, I believe you said like around 1,000 models? You guys have multiple models, or is it?
No, simulations.
Simulations with it?
Anywhere, actually, we're running between 2,000 and 10,000 simulations
Right.
against it, using different models.
Okay, so it is different models.
Yeah, we have models that check the models. So that's one of the ways we do risk averse as well. We don't just use one specific model. We run it through using a couple of different methods, which is actually pretty standard in this type of mathematical modeling. You don't just rely upon one algorithm. You run it through a few times and see if they diverge or deviate from each other in ways that are unexpected. You go, okay, something's wrong. That's actually some of the interesting part of what we do for testing, is we sort of come up with how we can make that go wrong. Like one of my testers, I love him, I'm probably gonna give him a bonus. He found a way that you can like fudge the system and make it so you will always get a check from us. Because your deductible is now negative. Yeah, I know. I want him doing my taxes. But the math was right. That's what the model should have done. It should have had a negative for the estimation for bushels and things during using the model. Just how we processed it wasn't right later down the field. So this goes back to a system thinking chaos type of idea. How can every single piece be right yet wrong at the same time? And that's what he found. He found a case where every single little piece was right, did what it was supposed to do, and was so very wrong at the end. So yes. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So hey, my name is Chris and I work in infectious disease modeling.
Ooh!
So
We actually might want to talk to you, because we're breaking into pest outbreaks and things like that, yeah.
it sounds really familiar.
Yeah.
What you said earlier that I found really fascinating was the idea of breaking apart validation and testing.
Mhm.
And in your context, I think what you were suggesting is that in validation, you're just like, I've got a bunch of petabytes of data, and I need to make sure that the data is good. And you have testers who hire subject matter experts, and they're looking at the model to make sure the models work.
Yeah.
What I'm curious is the places where there's a little bit of bleed over. So let's take what was the pest for that you mentioned for corn, the root.
Oh, the corn rootworm.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you can imagine easily that you might have your model and you've got some sort of parameter you can turn off and on about enable rootworm, and then you could say I want a little of them or a whole lot of them, and you can run a model and see that it basically does what you'd expect. So if there's no rootworm, you get some sort of yield. If you have a few, it's a little less, and a lot, and it's a lot less. And at some point, you sort of shrug your shoulders and say, that sounds like I've actually done like an acceptance level of testing. I can hand that off to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you're finding yourself in a situation where you're actually sort of looking at the science, even if it's just a tiny bit of it.
Yeah.
So how do you guys manage breaking that apart? Or did I just give you a free segue to your next thing?
No, you didn't. I brought it up, but I'll bring it up again.
Okay.
And I'll do it again. I don't care. Herring. This is a question that was asked to me by the guy who's now the VP or the Chief Technology Officer for the company. He asked me, so should we have an independent test department? And it took me a little while, because people who know me say I don't like to jump in and say yes or no to those questions. Because every context is different, every situation is different. I've worked, again, I was the sole tester for the data group at Electronic Arts. Out of, I think when I left, there were 68 developer engineers working on it, and I was one of me. And that worked for them because of what they were doing and what their thing was doing. I've also had another place, a team that I was managing of 12 local people and 47-ish, because in some areas of the world the thing just fluctuates a lot. And just doing that, we had I think like 10 or 12 developers. So how should it work? I don't know. The question that I asked, do we have a separate test environment? Was that right there? Yes. Because if we didn't, the people who were doing the data validation would be sitting over there with the Hadoop guys, running their MapReduce stuff and doing their stuff. Yeah, let's get Java, woo! And the scientists would be over here going, woo, Kelvin, woo! I don't know, whatever they talk about. And they wouldn't mingle. They wouldn't have that cross-pollination, which is the same thing we had at Medro. The people weren't talking to each other because they didn't plan their growth well, and it sort of grew up around us. So, it may have changed, by the way, if you're watching, it may have changed now. Please tell me if it has. What we're trying to build here is that by being on the same team, attending the same meetings, talking to each other, saying, can I help you with that? You know, yes, please come help me run these test cases, do whatever. We'll start to have that knowledge exchange that comes along with that. So it's the same idea of pairing a developer and a tester when we work on a project. It's like, so there will be some cross-pollination. I've seen it. It's inevitable. Unless you've got the Drupal guy who just wants to put on his headphones and just ignores everybody else, which you may need, I don't know. But normal people, when they sit next to each other and start talking, will symbiotically start fudging knowledge between each other. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen here with an independent test team. It may change in 2 years. It may say no. It doesn't make sense. We should all be part of the same agile team where there's no testers, there's no developers, there's just engineers, and we're just doing it. And yeah, that's why I love this type of company. I never know what's going to happen.
So are you speaking of pairing in a general sense of the cross-pollination and information exchange, or do you guys literally have programmer scientists?
In this case, it is literal pairing. In this case, they are literally sitting next to each other because the scientist, or the, I don't know what to call them, the subject matter trained, I guess, would be the case here. Maybe not expert yet, but hopefully. They are going to need data to run these models. And they're going to need to get the data from somewhere. Somebody needs to make it. Because it's not just turning a flag on and off. It's not just going into God mode, the computer and saying, sword. You've got to find some way to make that stimulate. Because Halo's an easy one, or a pest outbreak is somewhat easy, but there's usually a duration on it and things. There's an infestation level, there's, you know, and pests are never just pests. There's always like soil and moisture and whatever that have effects on that. So just even that simple model of, do we have corn rootworm? You need data that's going to simulate that in a realistic manner. Somebody has to make that for you, the data person. Then that starts with, why do you need that? Oh, for this. Oh, okay. It's like, so where does that come from, that data? Oh, that comes from over here. Really? It comes from the Farm Services Agency? Really? Oh, okay. Wouldn't have thought that. Well, why not? And then back and forth, and you get that. Just from trying to solve a problem together, this starts happening. So, we're getting a sign. Yes?
Yeah. John, do you have one more question? Want to do one more and then call it good?
Sure.
Okay. Cool.
So does anybody have one more question, I guess?
This is a great, lively discussion, and I don't mean to cut it off, but I know people want to go. We'll do the drawing, and then if you want to stick around for a few and talk to Curtis.
Okay, who has the odd-sized card? Uh-oh. Andy Fox.
Yeah, you can right up. So tonight we're going to do two drawings. So we have a $25 Starbucks gift card, and we have also this little gift box of treats.
Well, I know that my political